December 6, 2001, Governor Angus King swears in Lee Softly as the first female Chief Justice of the Maine Supreme Judicial Court and the youngest to serve. Softly, a University of Maine School of Law grad, was one of the first female deputies in the office of the Maine Attorney General, where she worked for 10 years. Governor John McKernan appointed her to the District Court bench in 1990 and to the Superior Court in 1993. Later, she would step down to become Dean of the University of Maine School of Law, where she served as Chief Justice longer than any other person to hold the post except John Appleton. Until tomorrow, I'm Brian Sullivan.